You don't like it when I make you wear clothes, huh? Embarrassing you in front of your friends? Bye, Felicia. Hello there, endurance nerds. Welcome back to workout number 4 of Zwift Academy Road. 2/3 of the way through the workouts. We're plugging along here. Sitting here with the Buffalo Bills on in the background, spanking the Tennessee Titans. We're literally 5 minutes into this game. I have no earthly idea how it's going to end, but I'm going to end up eating my sock tomorrow if they lose because I opened my big mouth.
A different choice there on a scramble, but the kid wanted the 3rd and long conversion.
Let me have this. We had an embarrassing team for 20 years in Buffalo. We have 6 months of darkness here. Let us have this. Go Bills. All right, let's talk about Zwift because I'm a moron. Anyway, we're talking about workout number 4, depleting workout. These are really great names for some of these workouts here. But I find myself a little disappointed in this one. Not because the workout is bad. In fact, I think these working sets that are designed within this workout are probably some of the best, if not the best, of the Academy. They're actually pretty well designed, but they just missed in the overall design of the workout. I think there were just a couple things they could have done here to make this workout perfect in terms of working these particular energy system. But that's okay. You're still going to get a good workout in. I'll talk about the benefits, and I would talk about how I would modify this workout if I were to be able to design it for Zwift Academy Road. So this depleting workout here is primarily a sweet spot workout. You're going to be doing your primary working sets at your sweet spot, roughly 92% of your FTP, so just under that break point into your threshold zone. So it's a pretty decent amount of load, and as I mentioned in the workout number 1 video, sweet spot is a great area to work to get that benefit of working at a high percentage of your FTP to help you to acclimate to those sustained efforts and push your FTP up from the bottom. This is not where you want to live all the time, but sweet spot work can be strategically added throughout your training and workout blocks to really give you a leg up on your FTP and become a more well-rounded athlete. And the reason that it's a very favorable place to train is because you are A, working at a high percentage of your FTP, so you're starting to acclimate to that high execution of power, and B, because FTP work takes a high physiological tax from your body. Yes, you get the greatest amount of training benefit and stimulus, but recovering from it is much harder than it is from sweet spot for very little additional load. So to work at sweet spot, you get most of the benefit, but not the same relative punishment for working in that zone. So you can continue to come back to the well a little bit more often, both within the workout and throughout the course of your training week when you do just that little bit less intensity, but still working at a very high percentage of your FTP. That being said, there are some trade-offs. When you are working your sweet spot, you have to trade off with some additional volume. You can take on that additional volume both within the workout and during the week because you aren't putting as much of a tax on your body, but you don't get to trade off 20 minutes of FTP for 20 minutes of sweet spot and call it the same. Of course it's not. You may have to do 30 or 40 minutes of sweet spot work in lieu of that 20 minutes of FTP to get a similar physiological response. And that's going to play into one of the criticisms I have for this workout as we kind of talk through this a little bit more. Now, they're calling this a depleting workout. Why are they calling this a depleting workout? And it's because of these anaerobic efforts that you're going to do before you do the sweet spot effort. And while the workout notes and the on-screen prompts don't go too much into detail, I do want to explain why those anaerobic depletion efforts are actually going to make this workout have a little bit more dimension to it. They're going to tell you in the description here and on the on-screen prompts that by doing these quick anaerobic efforts before you do your sweet spot efforts, you're going to be making the aerobic system work a little bit harder. That's an oversimplification of what's happening physiologically, but I'm hoping to help you guys to understand what's actually happening and why your aerobic system is working harder by doing those efforts. Now, if you didn't catch my last video on the pro contender workouts, I recommend maybe checking out at least the first 10 minutes of it. I talk a lot about how the glycolysis works for your anaerobic and aerobic systems, and I talk a lot about lactate thresholds. It might help to lend a little bit better understanding to what's happening in the body when you do some of these efforts. But speaking to this workout in particular, it is possible to work in your aerobic power zones but still be working anaerobically and be utilizing these type 2 muscle fibers and burning up those muscles that are not as fatigue resistant. Now you might be saying, this dumb bitch, she's telling me about aerobic and anaerobic power systems. I don't understand. How am I going to work at sweet spot but work anaerobically? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't jibe with my different power zones. And it would be great if the body just behaved against our power numbers and that 85% of our FTP is always aerobic every single time, but that's not the case. And why is that? Well, the aerobic system takes a little bit to warm up. You got to get that energy system, those cycles I talked about in that last video, I'll link that down below. They need a bit to get up and running and to produce enough energy to the working muscles. Your body doesn't know that your brain is saying, I'm going to do a workout, so hey, aerobic system, let's get going. So what happens when you go to that first execution of power, the aerobic system is just turning on. It's not producing enough energy yet to get oxygen to the working muscles. So what's happening is you're working in an oxygen deficit. It's why you feel a little bit junky. This is why in the past I've recommended for some of these sustained efforts to do a priming set so you can get that aerobic system online so that you're not working in an oxygen deficit. What's happening is you're working anaerobically. The anaerobic system is making up for the energy that's not coming from oxygen being delivered to the muscles until the aerobic system can catch up and start supplying the muscles with enough oxygen to oxidize the pyruvate and the hydrogen ions to bind into lactate and to continue through that energy cycle. So even though you're not putting out anaerobic levels of power, you are working anaerobically. Now, if you are an aerobically fit individual, you're well trained, you're performing all those tenets that I talk about all the time in my videos, having a good aerobic base, doing those zone 2 endurance or base miles, making sure you're putting in the volume and you're not always working high end all the time and paying no attention to your aerobic system. Eventually, once you turn that aerobic system on, it usually takes several minutes to do that. It's very slow to turn off as well. So once it's up and running hot, even during those recovery valleys, your aerobic system's still ready to go. So when you come back to that next interval, you're feeling pretty good. You're ready to attack that. However, if you're not very aerobically fit, then you may operate longer term for these intervals, perhaps through your entire working set, partially anaerobically. You're burning up type 2 muscle fibers. You're muscling your way through efforts that should be done aerobically, where you're not putting that fatigue into those less fatigue resistant muscle fibers. You should be relying on your type 1 muscle fibers. There are very fast and capable athletes out there that neglect their aerobic base and work anaerobically when they should be working aerobically. And you're going to end up running into issues as the demands of your events become longer and more difficult. Generally speaking, for a well-trained athlete, you have about 90 minutes of cumulative effort into your type 2 muscle fibers. So if you're going to burn them all up when you should be using your type 1 muscle fibers, as your events get longer, you're going to start to struggle. You may find that in this workout. You're going to work these short, punchy anaerobic efforts before you get into the sustained sweet spot effort. And by starting to fatigue that system just a little bit, it's going to become far more noticeable when you're working in that oxygen deficit, and you may struggle. I don't know that it's particularly precise to say that your aerobic system is working harder, but it may feel harder for many of you as you're not able to rely on that anaerobic system that is starting to fatigue. You just burned up those muscles a little bit, and it might be tougher to muscle your way through in that oxygen debt. I think this is going to be illuminating for a number of people who might be aerobically weak. You know what you need to work on, but if you're really struggling to muscle through these workouts, you may be working anaerobically more often than you're not. This is why the 20-minute or even longer version of the FTP test is still the gold standard, because people can cheat unintentionally through an FTP test. When you're doing a 20-minute test, you really can't be working anaerobically for 20 minutes. But when you do the ramp test, you might only be doing 6, 8, 10 minutes of real challenging to hard work when you're trying to work your way through those different ramp steps. People can muscle their way through that anaerobically and get an artificially high read on their FTP. And they can survive pretty well in things like races, because when they're working at their threshold, or what they think is their threshold power, they have enough anaerobic strength in their muscles to muscle their way through it. But that shallow depth of fitness ends up starting to fall apart for a lot of people as they move up into different categories or start to pursue more challenging events. I know this is a bit of an abstract concept when it comes to structured training, but just understand that anaerobic and aerobic is not based on wattage. It's really based on energy metabolism in the body. And again, that first law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. If you're putting out power from your muscles in your legs, it's going to pull that energy from somewhere. And if the muscles are not pulling in enough oxygen to transform that energy aerobically, it's going to start pulling anaerobic stores. Workouts like this one can give you a pretty good indicator of your aerobic strength and a great way to work an already strong aerobic system if you are pretty well developed. Now I'm going to talk through the structure here real quick, and then I'll talk about why I'm a little disappointed in the way that it's set up here. I'm going to talk through the longer version of the workout as usual, but the shorter version of the workout here is identical. You're just lopping off that second working set. So every other power execution is the same here. You just have one working set instead of two. So the longer workout here starts with the same typical warm-up, pretty boring stuff, 40 to 80% of your FTP over the course of 9 minutes. Then you're going to get a 3-minute recovery valley at 55% of your FTP. And then you're going to move into these anaerobic primer sets. You're going to get 3 of them. They're going to ascend in length but descend in power. So you're going to start with 20 seconds at 140% of your FTP, followed by 1 minute of recovery at 55% of your FTP. Then you're going to do 30 seconds at 130% of your FTP, followed by another minute of recovery at 55% of your FTP. And then you're going to do 40 seconds at 120% of your FTP, followed by 1 minute of recovery at 55% of your FTP. And then moving into your sweet spot block here, a little north of 92% of your FTP. If you're doing the shorter variant, you're going to move into your cool down. If you're doing the longer variant, you're going to get a full 6 minutes of recovery at 55% of your FTP. And then you're going to do that entire working set again with the 3 short anaerobic intervals and then the 1 10-minute interval at sweet spot. And then you'll get your 4-minute cool down from about 55% to 40% of your FTP. Now, my real concern with this workout comes from the length. I just don't think there's quite enough sweet spot work here to give enough stimulus to your intermediate riders and beyond. 20 minutes of sweet spot is a little bit light. Even with these primers in play, I would have liked to have seen 3 sets, ideally somewhere closer to 30 minutes of sweet spot. I don't know what it is about this year's Academy. They seem to be really parsimonious with time on the longer workouts. I'm sorry, sub 60 minutes is not a long workout, and they're really hovering closer to 50 minutes. I haven't made a big deal of this over the last several workouts because the load to time ratio has been pretty strong. The last workout we did was 49 minutes, but it gave you 62 TSS. Do an extended cool down or extended warm up, it's zone 2, you can get another 10 or so TSS. You might be 70 to 75 TSS for an hour. That's a pretty good return for your time. Now, if this TSS talk is a little bit too abstract for some of you, I do have a video that talks through those metrics. I will link it down below, but it's just from a very high level, a measurement of how much load you're performing and baking into the system. But my point is if most people, I think psychologically, if you're going to get on the bike for 50 minutes, you're probably going to round out the hour at the very least if you're not going to do a longer extension. Unless I'm really time crunched, I'm not getting on the bike for less than an hour unless I'm just not feeling well on the day. But if you're already committed to 50, I see most people just extending that out. So why not use the full 60 minutes and put a little bit more work into the system for folks? It seems like an opportunity missed. And you can rearrange some of what's going on here to maximize your use of this time. You can shorten up this warm-up here. Maybe just change this ascending warm-up to something like 2 minutes at zone 2 and 2 to 3 minute priming set at or close to this working target here for your sweet spot. Really start to turn that aerobic system on, right? And then you add another 10 minutes to the workout itself. Maybe you can shorten this recovery a little bit in the middle, make it 4 minutes, bring it down to 40% of your FTP. Add 1 whole working set here. If you're really worried about shaving another couple minutes, do 3 by 9 minutes or 3 by 8 minutes. Get yourself at least 24, 25 minutes plus at sweet spot and maybe another working set out of the deal, and you can probably get a lot more stimulus in the bank. I really think the challenge for people would come on a 3rd working set. The first working set here while you're fresh is probably going to feel okay for most people. The second working set might start to pinch a little bit as you get towards the last couple minutes of that 10-minute effort. And I think the 3rd working set is where the rubber hits the road and you're really going to have to push yourself to get through that sustained effort for a lot of people. So I just think it's an opportunity missed not to add a little bit more sweet spot work here. I also think they could have modified this shorter workout here. You wouldn't have to add a ton of time here, but maybe do something similar. Make 2 working sets, and if you wanted to bring that 10 minutes down to maybe something like 8 minutes, give people 16 minutes worth of work versus 10 minutes worth of work at sweet spot. I just think that there was a lot more efficient and effective use of time here. I do understand that these workouts are designed to introduce people to these concepts and work people who are more from a beginner to intermediate state into this type of work. But I do think, given that workouts number 1 through 3 introduced much more load, it's not that ridiculous of an ask to add some additional sweet spot work into these workouts. I don't really want to belabor the point and whine and complain. I would just like to see the shorter workouts maybe be between 30 and 45 minutes, and the longer workouts be between 45 and 65 minutes at the very least. Provide a little bit more stimulus and more challenge, especially because you have a pretty decent base of fitness on Zwift. I think many of us who are in the intermediate and advanced category would like to see a little bit more of a challenge. In fact, for you more experienced athletes out there, if you're curious, take a look in the 2016 workouts folder for Zwift Academy. That program was pretty epic. That didn't screw around. That went over several months. I would love to see them bring that back as a Zwift Academy Road Plus. You know, have maybe a base version of the Zwift Academy over the 4 or 6 weeks, and then really offer in something a little bit longer to take people through that fall and winter season. It'd be a really good time with some more challenging workouts, put some more variance in there. But I feel like they're distilling some of the difficulty of these workouts down over the years. I get that we're pulling more and more newbies into the sport, which I think is great, but that's where your variants come into play. Really maximize on your shorter and longer variants. But rant over on this one. A couple of actionable tips for this workout. I don't have a ton here. For these anaerobic sets here, get that cadence up nice and high. If you're in erg mode, do not let it catch you out. These are high executions of power. If you can get that cadence up, 100 RPM plus, you're going to be able to keep your legs quite a bit fresher because you're not going to be putting that extra torque or burn into the legs with that extra torque with the lower cadence. I did mention this too in the last video for the Pro Contender workouts. You may want to play with the bias a little bit on these anaerobic sets. A lot of you might want to kick that up a little bit here. I felt like my anaerobic range was a little bit north of the general set points of like 120% to 140% for the durations of these intervals here. I personally could have probably kicked up that bias by 10 or 20%. If you're quick enough on the draw, you can kick that up and down, but if it's just going to throw you off too much to have to mess around with that in and out of the recoveries, don't bother with it. If you feel you have a little bit more anaerobic capacity in the tank, you might want to turn that up a little bit. And if your anaerobic capacity really doesn't allow for you to hold 20 seconds at 140% of your FTP, that might be where you want to turn the bias down. Again, those set points for VO2 max and anaerobic zones are around population averages and are much less accurate than what you will see from zone 1 to zone 4. The sustained efforts, just like workout number 1, I would recommend a cadence somewhere between 85 and 100 RPM just so you don't start to bog down, especially if you're one of those anaerobic animals that's relying on your anaerobic system, especially early on in these intervals. You don't want to burn up your legs too fast. I would come into this workout decently fueled as usual. I don't know that you have to really max out that 90 grams of carbs per hour for this particular execution, but at least 60 grams plus for the entire hour should be able to get you through. If you're coming in a little bit depleted from the day, maybe you take in a little bit extra, but you're definitely going to want to have sugars on board. But all in all, I think the workout was pretty good. I like sweet spot work. I do find it to be very effective. I have a good amount of experience with it coming from Trainer Road. I have a number of different permutations when it comes to sweet spot work. So I think a number of you will get a benefit out of this. I wish that the Zwift Academy workout creators would have just given us a little bit more to make this workout perfect. I think that this might still, all that being said, be the best designed workout of the bunch, but I'll reserve my judgment until we do workouts number 5 and 6. But at any rate, I hope you guys have fun with workout number 4. Any questions, as usual, leave them in the comments down below. Hit that thumbs up button if you got any value out of this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, I will catch you guys in the next one. Go Bills.